We are not in a system of parachute journalism where a white person will just fly into our country and tell their story how they want to tell it. The fact that we are the ones telling our stories. It is very easy for people to say that there is child slavery all around Ghana, but if you allow a Ghanaian to tell their story, he understands the nuances, and that is what Africa I represent. And I'm happy that my brother navigated it very well. Thank you so much, Kwabna.
Thank you very much. Like I said, we've already spent quite a lot of time here. We want to analyze it with us and share your views on it and ask all the relevant questions you want to ask. So kindly take note if you have any questions. There's going to be a Q&A session where to some persons. But clearly, we cannot lose sight of the fact that the problem exists. The scale of it perhaps may be questionable depending on which side of the aisle you are on. So how do we take a holistic view of this situation and deal with it in a way that benefits the people who truly need to benefit?
Well, I think that as a society, we have failed very, very woefully when it comes to social protection and child protection. In fact, institutions like the IJM and several other NGOs who are working in Ghana, like your documentary said, have good intentions. And for most of the time, these intentions are implemented with local partners. I have been working in this space with child slavery. In fact, I actually have an article on modern day slavery because I basically consider myself as maybe a semblance of that, because some few years back I used to be at Malata Market and I used to sell on the street. The difference between me and maybe another child may be that I could vent all day and sometimes all night, but early morning I'll go back to school. So I did not allow some of those things I was doing on the streets, living on the street, to interfere with my aspirations of going to school and making something out of myself. So I think we need a deeper understanding, a local contextual meaning of what amounts to child slavery. Because there's a thin line between children helping their parent, which is culturally acceptable, and child slavery. But the problem is that we must accept the fact also that in a number of these domestic relations, there are potential abuses. And for most of these NGOs, what they are looking for is a potential abuse. The question is whether they have the local knowledge, they have they are properly targeting the outreach. In this case, IGM put up a notice that said that they've done like about 78 operations. Yeah, maybe that's really great. But if you were to subject all of them to the high standards like you did in 2 major operations, there could be defect. And these defects occur because sometimes the local partners, in their dishonest way of achieving targets, right, then they then mislead people. Recently, before I just wrap this up, I was working with International Justice Mission. No, not International Justice Mission. Love Justice International. Oh no, but I think I have lawyers who have actually worked for International Justice Mission before. But Love Justice International does child trafficking monitoring, and we had to sever our relationship and partnership because of targeting. You know, every month you must get this, but this is a social problem. It's not every month that you can get 10, 20 children who are being trafficked because you are sending people out there. So we must move from using the numbers as a way of measuring success to looking at the quality of life of the people we are intervening from. For example, I was adopted from the street by a Village of Hope orphanage. I was put at the orphanage. I lived with the Village of Hope orphanage for several years. What is the outcome? I'm a lawyer. So you should look at these kids that you are talking about. Can we trace their life for the last 10 years? For the last 20 years that you've done interventions, you've rescued them. What is the outcome of those children? This is a critical question I think the NGOs should be asking themselves. And I mean, and at the policy level, I think that we have a lot to do. Maybe from here, Betty and I will be taking up at the Gender Committee. We are hoping that Parliament would definitely do something about this. I think that Ghana should be interested. We are sometimes not too serious when it comes to this things, and I go too blunt with it. For example, the IGP should be able to cause an investigation, of all police officers who are being able to lead all these raids. Because if you're a police officer and you lead this raid, you're supposed to arrest upon reasonable suspicion of a crime. When there is no crime, you don't go arrest people, prosecute them, and throw them into jail. And most likely, these women did not have representation. So it's a very endemic problem that I think needs a lot of thought and a lot of work to be able to reverse. Thank you.
All right, dear, what really exists on the lake? The issue of trafficking, slavery, child labor, even. How endemic is the problem?
So, first of all, I would say that we don't know the numbers. A lot of organizations throw wild figures about, but none of them is absolutely certain, including the IJM itself, despite the claims that it makes. And this is challenging in part because there are very fine margins, if you want, between what one might call a child labor case, an exploitative child labor case, and the trafficking case. We know, for instance, that in our sociocultural context, living with one's extended family relatives, sometimes even the family friend, is not pathological, far from that. The problem is that some organizations consider this in entirely negative terms. And so a child living with their extended family relative, for instance, can be classed as a trafficking victim mistakenly, because if you look at the definition of trafficking, it involves the movement of a child for the purpose of exploitation. And these are all very loaded terms. What exploitation means differs in different contexts. I was saying this earlier. I used to pound fufu as a child till my fingers were all blistered up. In the UK where I work, I tell my colleagues and they go, "You poor man, do you need counseling? Maybe you've been traumatized as a child." In Ghana, that form of work, including helping, to do certain domestic chores which are extremely difficult, we don't consider those things as necessarily problematic. And that extends to these fishing communities too, where children partner with parents, extended family relatives to find fish to feed the family. So there is that aspect which muddies the waters, and I think that really brings into the fore the need for any organization seeking to intervene in these issues to be extremely careful, because as we've seen, without due care and attention, you can end up traumatizing more children than you actually help, or indeed as many children, not just children, families as well. And so there is that issue. But the other point I want to make very quickly relates to what I call the business model, because much as NGOs are benevolent organizations, they are also, many of them, businesses, right? So we've seen that alongside all the glitzy adverts about rescues and so on, come the magic button, donate me or fund me or whatever the button says. And the IJM, for instance, we're talking about them, as Francis and others have said. This is not about the IJM exclusively. It's a wider structural issue. But the IJM, the organization in question, makes over $1 million from this. Careers have been built on it. People are very well paid on it. And if you have a structure which depends on the existence of a problem, then the question of whether you are likely to say it's not pervasive becomes challenging for you. Because if you go into a funder to say, well, I want $100 million, whatever, to go and address this issue, and they ask, is it a big problem? And you say, no, you're not getting the money. So there is that issue to which we should be attentive as well. How the problem is defined is not a simple matter of sheer benevolence or charitable ends. It's also about a need to intervene in a certain issue, a need to pay staff, a need to pay office buildings, and all of those things too. And that can sometimes result in these excesses that we've seen beyond the sheer fact of local partners being a bit dishonest or maybe not too good with what they do.
All right. Great point you make there. Become a challenge created by the organization itself?
Because the staff works in a structure, as we've seen. The way the whole system works is that you've got bodies such as the U.S. Department of Labor and others which provide funding. You've gone to them and you've said that I'm working in this country and there are tens of thousands of children trafficked or exploited, and we need X or Y amount of money to address the issue. Now, you've said the number, you've set it. The U.S. Department of Justice or whatever hasn't said to you that there are 10 trafficked children here. You've gone and given the number. So when you come back to Accra or Kenya or wherever you're working, you set the parameters for your staff, right? If you're saying to your staff, go out, and if you find an exploited child, help them. It's a different thing altogether than setting an arbitrary number and saying that we want to rescue 100 children. You've set these figures, and so it's almost as if you've created the problem and your staff are, operating within that same framework. If I can make this point very quickly,
Right.
The other reason that I think we ought to be really critical and careful about this is the fact that these forms of interventions are more pervasive in our part of the world. The IJM, for instance, doesn't have to be in Ghana, right? There are NGOs here in Ghana, indigenous local ones, with which it could partner to undertake these forms of interventions. And the fact that it's here, to my mind, is also, in a sense, destabilizing to those organizations here which could develop their own expertise, because then it means that they're not getting the chance to do it. There are children who are equally exploited in the USA, for instance. I don't see the IJM and other organizations calling American cops to go and, grab them from their parents. Or if you go to the US-American border, children trying to cross into that country who are independent child migrants are kept in cages by the American government. The IJM, if it wants to rescue real child slaves, can also do that operation, but it doesn't. And the reason why it doesn't do it even in Accra, where this issue will be seen and people might comment, is another thing to consider. Because these rescue missions are taking place in the most remote corners of our country, where very few people actually hear about it, were it not for the work, amazing work you've done here. I mean, you saw the pictures where these raids are going on. Nobody would have heard of the way in which the rights of our rural folk have been so heartlessly exploited in the name of trying to do good. So I think all of these issues give us a lot of food for thought for our policymakers, who I'm pleased to see are here with us this evening, to think about how these operations shape out the role of the state and state agencies in it, because police were there, social services people were there. It's not just the IJM at all. And so all of these bodies need to take a very kind of close look at themselves and figure out what's gone wrong and how they can be stopped.
Thank you, Doc. You make a very good point about
it and local actors. You see, because not until you are willing to take responsibility of your failures, you cannot rise above those failures to become a successful person. Historically, when we used to talk about colonialism and slave trade and all that, who were the local partners that were giving people on slavery? It's our people. We are ourselves. And so we cannot discount the role of the state. Because as an NGO, before you even work in any community, you need an NGO certificate from the social welfare. There is a legal requirement to renew that NGO certificate annually. You are supposed to file a report of your work annually. What happens with those reports? Are they investigated? When kids have been taken, what do we do? What happens to the police? I mean, the power of arrest. Look at the manner in which those arrests were done. What happens to legal representation for these people who have been arrested? So, yes, IJM, but I think that there is a huge part that we have played as a people that allows our vulnerability to be exploited. And I don't want that to be lost on us. Thank you.
Let's look at the representation as far as people are concerned like this. And of course, we can also take a look at the interventions at the various community levels also.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I must say, I just wanted a quick response to what my brother Susu said about he being a beneficiary of a lot of the interventions from some of these NGOs. And indeed, I must say that if really most of these NGOs really mean well, when you are citing the Afram Plains as an example, these are communities that do not even have basic schools. They do not have infrastructure. And so their children do not have the benefit of going on the lake and returning to the classroom. And so if it's an NGO that really do have the interest of the people at heart, then those are the basic fundamental things that first and foremost need to be looked at. Again, now when we come to Parliament and our interventions, of course, the Constitution of Ghana provides for every Ghanaian as a citizen your rights and what you are entitled to. And I am very much aware that the Constitution provides that every school going child, should have access to free basic education, right? And here we are as lawmakers or legislators, and we come out to Parliament with the report that some of these communities do not even have access to basic education. They do not have the teachers, they do not have infrastructure. And so it is our responsibility to actually throw light so that policymakers, government who are developmental agents or planners should be able to come up with a plan and a strategy to see how best these children are well protected, or better still, to see that schools or infrastructure are built and established in these communities. But we don't see that, and so I feel that we are doing our part. Like I earlier on said, I haven't sat idle, having been the center of attention, I must say, because most of these things really the focus is in the Afram Plains North. I quite remember in 2018, BBC equally did a documentary, and it was the other way round, where they were actually highlighting over 20,000 children being trafficked on the Lake. I came to Parliament. I actually did a statement of which the Speaker of Parliament at that time directed that government should do an investigation into the subject matter. Till date, we are still waiting to see or to hear the outcome. I have personally done a number of follow-ups. But again, until BBC came out with this documentary, most Ghanaians did not even believe the stories we're telling. I've ever had a position where I met one media person saying, oh, Honorable Betty is even promoting child trafficking. Now, the other question is that there is a very thin line between child labor and child trafficking. Again, I remember there was a time I did a statement on the floor of Parliament, and among my colleagues, everybody seems to be in a disagreement with me, because they felt that, well, if these children are being used on the Volta Lake, it's at a risk, and therefore it was okay for these NGOs to go to their rescue. It was left with only Honorable Che Mensah Bonsu, who actually came out and argued that when a white person or when an European takes his child to the factory side, it is considered as training, isn't it? Yeah. But when my mother takes me to the market or takes me to the lakeside, it is considered as what? Either child labor or child trafficking. Again, let me also emphasize that all of us here equally have a role to play. Now let's cast our mind back. Look at the rate of unemployment in our society. Look at the rate of unemployment. And gone were the days when, after even going to school and your mother is a bread baker, you are given the opportunity to learn how to bake bread. And so after your university education, after getting a very interesting job, you know that you can do baking as a side issue to make more earning. But here, now those other interesting activities are being classified as what? Either child labor or child trafficking. And so we have high rates of unemployment in our society. So I think that sincerely, it's important that we are having this conversation so that we just go back to who we were or who we are. So, and like my brother said, we should be given the opportunity to tell our stories, placing the Ghanaian social settings first, because we understand what we do and what is good for us, so that in the end, we do not allow some foreign interferences to come out there and tell our story. Finally, another side that I want to throw light on. I happen to have traveled to the United Arab Emirates. And any information you put out there in the media will be scrutinized. Is that not true? How come we allow our locals who probably want to make the best out of our unfortunate situation to tell our stories? Stories that will lead to them being able to what, raise more funds without the system properly scrutinizing stories that we put out there that are, in the end goes to put Ghana in a very bad light. So I believe that we all have a role to play, and again I continue to appreciate the opportunity, because without BBC, of course, I'm sure we will all not be sitting here paying particular attention to this development within our communities.
Okay, thank you. Again, we need to be mindful.
Work on this issue. I first became interested in it having worked on children's precarious labor in mine and cocoa farming and other sectors, and I saw a newspaper for the very first time, because I had taken a lot of interest in the work of anti-trafficking organizations, the IGM included, and I was really struck by the fact that nobody in the Ghanaian media was raising a question about the methods and approaches they were using. I was really very surprised at that. So when in 2017 thereabouts, I came across a news story which had been published by this MP. I followed up, and through that research, so I spoke with her and others, and I decided to follow up independently, as the BBC did, to some of the islands where the raids had occurred in 2017. And I just want to make this point because these are two issues which have been forensically looked at, but there are a lot more. And I'm making this point in relation to the need for compensation for those who have been victimized as a result of these actions by anti-trafficking organizations. So yes, they may have good intentions, but I think they can make good on their good intentions even more by compensating those who have been victimized as a result of their actions to try to do good things. You don't create more harm and leave it in the course of trying to do good. Because I know of a 70-year-old man who was caught up in the 2017 raids, who got several of his ribs broken when he and his grandson were picked up from their canoe, thrown very violently into one of the boats that had been sent to kind of rescue his grandson. I spoke to this gentleman who spoke of how he had been taken into a speedboat commandeered by the IJM, and a white man on the boat said, well, you can take him away, we don't need him. They left him at the shores of the lake, and when we met him, 3 of his ribs were still broken. The man passed away in 2019 or so, and I don't know, I'm not saying it's got to do with that injury. All I'm saying is that we need to be more aware of the excesses that can arise from this mode of intervention, because there are different ways of intervening in tackling this child rights issue, and there is a child rights issue to address here. And I certainly don't think, from all the research I've done, that breaking people's doors down at night and young, shoving AK-47 in grandmothers' faces and breaking old men's ribs is the way to address the issue. We can do it in a more responsible, a more humane way. I don't think we can prosecute and beat people out of our way of this problem. There is a more responsible way to do it.
Thank you very much.
Well, I think it's not unusual what the IJM has done. It's very normal, especially in our part of the world, for people. That's why when we do such pieces of journalism, we look for ocular proof. We look for hardcore evidence. And what people don't know is that before you saw this film come out, it would have passed through a lot of hands. Whilst you may see it as a local story, for the BBC, if you won a legal suit against them, we're talking about millions of dollars. So lawyers would scrutinize every single piece, every single word. I'm sure my brother will tell you what he has gone through. So I am 100% sure that when such stories come, we would have done our work very well. But I also don't deny them the opportunity to want to also explain their side. That's the beauty of our democracy. Let anybody or everybody talk. But I never forget, even when you have caught them with their hands in the soup, they still say it's not there. Thank you.
For that. And like you rightly pointed out, I am always looking forward to a cause, so that the documentary must lead to a cause. If you have such a beautiful documentary and it would not lead to a major social change or a change in approach, then it means that the documentary wouldn't have achieved its ultimate goal, because it's not just about exposing the problem. But when we have exposed the problem, what is going to be the course of action in all these things? So, for example, I'm sitting here looking at all these victims. What is going to be the follow-up action, right? I'm interested in finding out, can we bring these victims together and make a case, for these victims? Because obviously they are victims, and once there is evidence that these are victims, IJM would have to do the needful, right? Either face a legal action or, get some compensation for these victims, as my colleague here has shared already. So I am looking forward to all the public-spirited lawyers out there coming together, whether it's going to be the Law Society of Ghana, the GBA, Lawyers in Search of Democracy, whether it's going to be FIDA or child protection lawyers, to come together and form some coalition that can demand, and not only demand from IJM, but then again, demand for investigation into similar, organizations working with IJM. But whilst doing all these things, I would beg that we don't lose sight of the fact that the ultimate is the protection of our children. So if the ultimate is the protection of our children, then we are looking at what policymakers are doing to address the problem, such that the children who are at the heart of this discussion would not end up as victims, who they already are. But then there will be something done to address the situation of these children. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Betty.
Need for our rural folks to be given the necessary sensitization, so that they will be aware for which reason this raid is taking place. But of course, I even went further to suggest that out of the 222 island communities within the Afram Plains North, we have less than 10 accredited basic schools. We have less than 10 accredited basic schools. We have a total of 575 communities in Afram Plains North, of which we have only 80 GES accredited schools. So it means that we have less than 400 communities with no schools. Now, I went further to say, if your interest is in the well-being of the children, the Ghanaian child, I had started a program of building pavilions at my level. I had started about 20 pavilions in different communities. Can you come on board? Give them a window period of 6 months to see whether we will still find children on the lake, of which I didn't get any response. So before I come up with anything at all, I sincerely know what I'm talking about. So thank you.
All right. Just a final.
I think that when you even watch the film, you see that we are not oblivious of the successes that has been chalked in the past and even in the future. All we are saying is that we are watching you. When you take left, we watch. You take right, we watch. And that you are not going to have unfettered access to decide that what the lives of children are. If you say they are trafficked children, let them be. If you say they are child labor, they are undergoing child labor, we should have the evidence to support it. I don't think that it is fair for all NGOs or some NGOs to think that they can just go into communities and brand children anyhow. What is clear is that there are people who are watching, and I'm glad that the people are not just BBC people, but the people are Ghanaians. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A round of applause.
Means that she was arrested, she was charged, her plea were taken, and likely evidence was taken. But when you look at, I was telling Betty when we were there that this corroborate a lot of things I shared in my book titled Guilty Until Proven Innocent. Now, when you look at the approach, when you are caught with a child, everybody presumes you as guilty. And the likelihood that you may just go and you'll be told that, look, this thing, if you accept it, they will get you a smaller sentence. If you don't accept, you are going to go in for a very long time. It's subject to several abuses, except that we are careful what to say because you don't have like the real fact, every factual situation. But obviously they may have gone through, but I doubt whether these women had due process.
Okay, thank you for that.
Context, many would not be able to afford lawyers. Without any statistics, I can say that maybe between 99% of those cases will have no lawyers. And the few who may have lawyers may likely succeed because the proof of trafficking, it's a very difficult one, particularly within our cultural settings, right? Yeah.